entirety through the League's website in a few days. The link will also be sent via email to all of tonight's attendees. No other recording or reshowing of any portion of tonight's forum is authorized, and we hope you will all respect that. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League does not support political parties or candidates, but does take stand on some important issues after careful study and research. Membership in the League is open to all persons who are at least 16 years of age. That means not just women and not just citizens. And those under 16 can join us as associate members. Voter education is one of the League's most important functions, and the League encourages all citizens to register and cast an informed vote. At this point, I'd like to introduce and thank our partner in tonight's forum, the North Winton Village Association and its two co-chairs, starting with Mary Kofi.
Can't hear. What happened?
Thank you. And Marilyn Schutte and myself are more than honored to be sponsoring this, especially it being a Senate race. When we first started North Winton Village and we realized we had to take our streets back from the drug world, we had a meeting in a local business with our state officials and our federal officials and our local officials, knowing that we all had to work together. And with the grace of God and Jim Shepard and later Lloyd Kyler, we did it. We also realized how important the state is in raising our educational level, which is the lowest in the state, and also bringing in jobs for those that are in generational poverty that do not have a chance to have economic equality. So a Senate race is extremely important, and the help of the state is also very important. And I'm let Marilyn talk, who does all our beautiful flowers. And Jim Shepard had to start our own public safety building when he was down there. And we have a Marilyn Purchase who does our festival, which pays for rent. Marilyn?
I also would like to say thank you to the candidates for coming this evening. And you might like to know why North Winton Village has the name that it does. I know our area, the 55th district, goes all the way south to Naples. So there are a lot of little towns and villages that can relate to the fact that we have a village in the city of Rochester. And 25 years ago, the main streets were in rather distressful situation, code violations and on and on. So we realized we had to do something. We had a meeting after sending flyers up and down Winton Road, asked our people in the neighborhood, why do you want to live here? And it came out because it's a village. And in 10 minutes, they named it North Winton Village. From there on, we have done nothing but raise money, dues, grants, on. And the festival that Mary mentioned that supports the police station, this is all volunteer work. So finally, after 25 years, we have 140 flower pots. We have North Winton Village banners. We have bus stops. We have the gazebo. We have many community gardens and street lights that match the period of the neighborhood. And what I would like to say, also, we worked with developers many times to create the same commercial 1920s image of North Winton Village, trying to keep it intact and keep it with a certain identity. And as you probably, a lot of you know, that North Winton Village is one of the fastest selling areas in the whole Monroe County and beyond. It's the young people are just flocking to the area because of the easy walkability and so on. And I especially want our two representatives, or the two candidates that are running, that a lot of our funding came through the state of New York. And it came through what was called the Neighborhood Initiative Program. that our representative directed us into back from 1995 and on. And the sad thing I want you to know is that I do understand the program was discontinued. And it was the type of program where, you know, volunteers that, like in North Winton Village, could apply for these grants. They were very difficult, a lot of time consuming, a lot of sleepless nights trying to figure out how to work these grants. But they did a lot for North Winton Village, and I do not understand why they've been discontinued. So whoever wins the election, maybe you can figure this out and help other areas in the city, the other villages, the other areas of the 55th to get some help. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Now we'll turn to our moderator for tonight, is Tyrese Bryant. Mr. Bryant works in real estate and land use development for a local firm here in Rochester. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's in city and regional planning. Additionally, he is extensively involved in community service work, including serving as chairman of the Rochester Zoning Board of Appeals, president of the Board of Directors for Baden Street Settlement, and delegate in the 19th Ward Community Association. Please join me in welcoming Tyrese Bryant.
Thanks so much, Judy. I really appreciate this honor tonight, and thank you to both of the candidates tonight. We're going to jump right in and get started because we don't want to waste any time. We want to make sure we get information. Both candidates, I believe ground rules have been explained to you via email, and Linda is going to be our great timekeeper. You will see her throughout, so I'll introduce the candidates. Samra Brouk is an experienced business development and fundraising leader who has worked at nonprofits and technology startups. Her dedication to public service led Samra to join the U.S. Peace Corps and then leadership positions in organizations that help local governments improve recycling efforts, offer services to seniors aging in their homes, and that work to address inequalities in the public school system. We also have Chris Missick, is a veteran of the United States Army and operational Iraqi freedom, an attorney qualified to practice before the Supreme Court, and a local business owner. He is running on a platform of protecting public safety, reducing taxes, and finding innovative ways to bring back our local economy. Welcome both Samra and Chris. And tonight's first question, we will start with Mr. Missick. And this question will be for both candidates. As a result of COVID-19, New York State revenues have dropped dramatically and expenses have increased. Two-part question here. One, how will this affect new initiatives that you support? And two, what are the top 3 budget line items where you would look for budget reductions to deal with the deficit? Mr. Missick?
Well, thank you so much to everybody for hosting this debate. It's a real pleasure to be here. You know, we can't print money as a state. And so the idea of where is the money going to come from, I do think relies on an answer from the federal government. We are going to need some help, and we're going to need it to make sure that important services that take care of people's health and education, communities, is available. When it comes to the issue of what we're going to cut, there are so many things on the table that we can talk about, but there are 3 that come to mind immediately. First and foremost, we need to cut the nearly $500 million in Hollywood tax credits. Those don't even really benefit anywhere upstate. 90% of that is spent in New York City. $42 million of that goes to Saturday Night Live. I would put the publicly funded campaign measure on the table as well. There's $100 million, but that only gets us to $600 million. I really think it's time that we take the $8 billion that's set aside for the governor's economic regional development councils, which have oftentimes funded crony projects and led to wasteful spending in the billions of dollars, off the table. That will save us $8 billion. We're that much closer to protecting our children's education and funding the health that we need here in New York State.
Thank you so much, Chris. Samra, same question.
Sorry about that.
You're fine.
I've only been using Zoom for 6 months. Thank you for that question. And thank you also just for everyone, for the partner organizations hosting us today. This is such important work that you're doing. And this is a serious question, right? I think that, we have talked to hundreds of voters, thousands of voters, small business owners. People are hurting, and not just in, New York State and as a whole, but in the 55th district, especially when we look at our unemployment numbers. And I think that the thing I really want to instill with people is that every day, our state legislators, our governors, our government, our representatives, they are making choices about what is important and what is not. And here's the truth. Here in the 55th district, our schools were already owed $100 million before COVID-19 even hit. Now we know that things like schools and healthcare need more funding, not less. And there are a number of ways that we can draw in new revenue. So I don't look at this as a way of how we're going to cut the things that people need even more than they do normally. We can do things like taxing our billionaires to do their fair share, because the truth is working families in the 55th district have done everything right, and we can't bear the brunt of this crisis.
Thank you very much. The next question, we'll start with you, Samra, for this one. And it's a two-part question. Do you, one, support Black Lives Matter? And two, what have you done personally and will do legislatively if elected?
To support Black Lives Matter.
Support Black Lives Matter.
Yes. First and foremost, yes, of course I support Black Lives Matter, because Black lives do matter. My life matters, my husband's life matters, my brother's life matters, my parents' lives, my grandparents, all of whom live here in the 55th district. It is not a question about if people's lives matter. It's a question about whether or not we have leadership who's willing to admit that in this country, we have done a lot of things well. We've done a lot of things right. And sometimes we miss the mark. And we have clearly missed the mark, especially here in the city of Rochester. Daniel Prude should be alive today. He should have gotten the mental health support that he needed. My aunt was a psychiatric nurse right here in Rochester for years. She's about yay high and smaller than me, and she was trained especially to deal with people who are in those kinds of crises. So we need to be able to look at the professionals who are trained, specially trained to deal with these kinds of crises. And on the state level, we have a responsibility to support our local governments, our counties and our cities in making these very difficult decisions around making sure that we are giving the resources needed to be able to have the right tools in the toolbox. And there are things that we can do at the state level. Just this year, in response to George Floyd, which didn't even happen here, the death of George Floyd, that didn't happen here in New York, our state legislator passed a really important piece of legislation called the STAT Act. That was just a very simple, bipartisan, by the way, measure that called for collecting demographic data on who was arrested and who was hurt in police custody. And every single senator voted for that except for two. And one of them is the senator that I'm trying to replace right now, Senator Funke. And those are some of the things that our state government, it's not even an opportunity to act on, but we have an obligation because our communities are hurting and we have to admit that there is a problem and be willing to come to the table to fight for solutions.
Thank you very much. Chris, same question in regards to Black Lives Matter.
This is a personal topic for me. Of course, Black Lives Matter. When I was deployed and Sergeant Burrell was working right by my side, I was willing to put my life on the line. And that's the great thing about military experience. You learn to look to the heart of people and you understand that we all need to make sure we're watching out for each other. And in those instances where there has been an injustice, we need to correct that. But I don't support the organization because I don't support defunding the police. And I don't support a number of the other initiatives that I think are far too radical and will change the way our country operates in ways that aren't beneficial. What I do think we can do to really help Black lives and to improve the state for African Americans in our community and our state is to support provisions and ideas that will work to end poverty. That's why I've introduced my infrastructure bank, which will focus on distressed urban communities and rural communities and fund projects, create jobs, and improve lives. That's how we make sure we help different communities in this state.
And to follow up on that question, Chris, would there be any legislation, anything additional, if you were elected, that you would suggest legislatively in the reaction to the death of Daniel Prude here in Rochester?
Oh, absolutely. And I've been doing this actually from the period of the death of George Floyd. First and foremost, I'm not someone who says no reform is needed. That's not the case. We have to look through everything, analyze it closely. And the very first thing I isolated was the idea that if there is a police involved killing of an unarmed civilian, it should automatically go to a grand jury. I was calling for this literally since June. And it wasn't until the Daniel Prude case and the tragedy that happened there and it came to light that even moved forward, when the Attorney General even announced that that was going to happen. It's important for our community to have transparency. It's important for our community to have a voice. And it's important when there is an unarmed civilian that dies in custody involving law enforcement, that it be addressed, because quite frankly, it's one of the most serious issues. So I would say, yeah, of course there are issues. I think that I'm proud to have been a leader on that issue in particular, because it's about restoring faith in our community and our leaders and our law enforcement.
Thank you very much, Chris. Samra, same question to you in regards to any additional legislation you would suggest in response to the death of Daniel Prude.
I speak solemnly on this because we are literally talking about a matter of life and death. And with all due respect, to say this is a personal issue, Chris, my opponent mentioned, it's not quite as personal to you to feel the pain and the anxiety, because the truth is everyone wants to feel safe in our communities. I grew up in this district. I know this district like the back of my hand, and I know the values that the people here hold. And what I know is leadership needs to, yes, be accountable and be transparent, but also listen. Listen to the communities that are in pain. Listen to the communities, because oftentimes they will tell us what it is they are looking for and what it is they need. And while grand juries and things like that to make people accountable for the actions individuals take, it's not just an issue about individuals. There is not just one leader who can change all of these things. We're talking about systems. And I think that people here in the 55th District are ready to talk about those systems and to really work together. And I'm talking city, suburban, and rural. People understand that something here is broken and that we have to address it head on, and we have to address it together, because that's how we're all going to feel safe in our communities.
Thank you very much. Changing gears here, Samra, we'll start with you with this question. Do you support stricter campaign finance reform legislation?
Absolutely. In fact, long before I was officially on the campaign trail, I got a chance to go over to Buffalo to actually testify at a fair elections hearing. And here's one of the major reasons why. A lot of the way our campaign finance works right now is to make sure that someone like me, a woman of color from a middle-class family in Western New York, a daughter of an immigrant and a public school teacher without, generational wealth to call on, can run for office. And so anything that we can do to re-democratize our democracy, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the ability for more people to not only be educated around who they're voting for, but more people to actually step into the arena and get the amazing opportunity to run for office, to have the opportunity and the privilege to represent their communities. And by taking care of some of these reforms and actually putting them into place, it means we get more teachers, we get more nurses, we get more frontline and essential workers sharing their experiences, their lived experiences, their experiences in the communities. And those are the people that so often will represent the needs and the values of the communities that they're living in. And these are the kinds of reforms that allow us to really open the door, widen the door, so that more people can participate in this process. So anything that helps us do that, I think, is in the right direction, whether it's making it easier to vote, whether it's making it easier to run for office. Those are all ways that we're making sure more voices are being heard at the decision-making table.
Thank you. Chris, same question.
Yeah, and real quick, I just want to say my agenda is about making everybody feel safe, every community. That's why I don't want to defund the police. And when it comes to money, I mean, my opponent sat on podcasts earlier in the year and was telling folks, if you want to get into politics, you need to raise money. That has to be your number one focus. And, I just think that that is a difference. You don't get more teachers. You don't get more firefighters by giving politicians welfare and $100 million a year. I think what we need to focus on is making sure that everybody does have access to running for office. We need to make sure that the shady money that's involved from folks like Reid Hoffman, I mean, Jeffrey Epstein's lead apologist after he went to jail for child prostitution, we don't need these sorts of folks involved in money in politics. What we need is to get back to this idea of grassroots, listening to the people, using the resources you have, relying on your community up here in upstate to run, not New York City and Silicon Valley.
Thank you very much. I just want to make sure, remind both candidates, because both of you have done it. I want to make sure that you stay focused on what your agenda items are. So for the rest of this forum, eliminate what your opponent's perspective is, and let's stay focused on the questions that I asked you directly. Please agree? Thank you very much. Forum, not a debate. Okay, so let's jump right in to Chris. I'll start with you with this question. A proposed constitutional amendment has passed both houses of the legislature in the current session, which would, one, eliminate the minority party from having an effective voice in redistricting, two, diminish the role of the independent redistricting commission established by the voters in 2014, and three, limit public participation in the redistricting process and create legal uncertainty. If this is presented in the 2021-2022 session, how will you vote and why?
Listen, I think that it's a travesty. What we are setting up for ourselves is more than just one party rule. It is, in essence, an oligopoly of like-minded, single issue, no diversity of thought, no diversity of experience, political gamesmanship. I would absolutely oppose anything like that. And I think what we need to focus on is the fact that we already have a majority out there that thinks the only way you have a seat at the table is if you're part of their party. They're willing to put the lives of kids and families on the line if you don't have the same letter next to them. So we need the public involved in redistricting. We need fair districts. We do not need more cronyism, because I'll tell you what, this form of political blackmail that's leading to even more corruption, it's not right for the people of New York. It's also why I've supported the New York State corruption amendment, to make sure that we can get corruption out of Albany, which everybody knows is there. And it's one of the reasons why I've endorsed real reforms, getting rid of JCOPE, having independent investigations. So I don't need to go on too much longer. Absolutely, let people have a voice. Let's have fair districts. Let's get away from monarchical rule in this state. Let's let the people have a voice in Albany.
Thank you. Samra?
Sure. Yes, I think that, having the ability to draw districts independently, and this has come up a lot when talking to folks, because they're concerned, frankly. They're concerned from everything that, we're not having our census counted correctly, to the fact that when I describe this district, I always have to do a little civic lesson on the hundreds of events and meet and greets and little porch parties and things like that we've had, is educating people about what this district actually looks like. Right? That it's this narrow strip from Lake Ontario down to Naples. And a lot of people ask me, how did that happen? Why was that created? And it's because we haven't had a fair redistricting traditionally. In fact, these are gerrymandered districts, right? And so certainly when given, the position to actually fight and advocate for a true, independent, fair, nonpartisan redistricting, it's absolutely what we should be doing. And unfortunately, we are in this position now, but I do believe with Democratic leadership, again, with leadership from this community, who believes in this community, and who listens to this community, that will drive us in the right direction to be able to do exactly that.
Thank you very much. Next question, we'll start with you, Samra, and it is a three-part question. New York State recently enacted many election reforms, but same-day registration and no excuse absentee balloting must be passed again by the legislature. One, would you support these proposals? Two, would you vote in favor of automatic voter registration? Automatic voter registration makes voter registration opt out instead of opt in. Eligible citizens who interact with government agencies are registered to vote unless they affirmatively decline. Would you be in favor of automatic voter registration. Just wanted to put what it meant out there to everybody listening. And 3, are there any other election reforms that you support?
So I want to start with, where I got to see the power of a strong democracy and the power that, to be honest, voter suppression can play when we don't have a strong democracy was working with Stacey Abrams and all of the work she did in the state of Georgia to become governor, and now what she's doing with Fair Fight. And you see how important it is to make sure that our states are actually putting forth these kinds of reforms. And so I'm absolutely a huge proponent of making sure that our democracy is actually democratic. And it's really important for people to understand that in 2018 was the first time we gained a true Democratic majority in the state Senate. And guess what we got? Early voting. We got some of these voting reforms that we have been trying to get for decades. And while I'm so excited that New York State finally passed that, the truth is about 40 other states had passed early voting before we did. Certainly we're not done though. The fact that we had to wait until being in the midst of a public health pandemic and crisis to say that no excuse absentee voting was something we wanted to do, we're late on that. We should have set up our state for success in terms of making sure that every single eligible voter can vote. That means yes to automatic voter registration. That means yes to same-day voter registration. That means yes to constant, no excuse absentee voting, regardless of if we are in a pandemic or not. Because what does that do? That makes sure that more people can vote. If you can't get off work, if you have to go early, if you're not feeling safe going outside, you can do it by mail. This is everything that we're doing to try to redemocratize our democracy.
Thank you very much. Chris, same question. Do you support the proposals? Would you vote in favor of automatic voter registration? And do you have any other ideas of any reforms that you would support in regards to election reform?
So the sanctity of our elections is important. We are in the midst, and have been for quite some time, of feeling like every institution in this country is failing us, whether it's higher education, the media, corporations, government. And so that one area of our vote has, for the most part, been something that people can rely on. So I want to make sure that we do everything we can to protect that. Part of that, in my case, means no automatic voter registration. I think it's important for a citizen to stand up and say, I want my voice to matter, and I'm going to take an effort to do that. And I'm going through that right now. My wife just became a citizen 2 months ago and had to fill out her voter registration card. I also have to say, I don't support radical proposals. I think, for example, felons should not have the right to vote. I think once you have committed a crime to that degree, you've forfeited a benefit of citizenship.
Thank you very much, Chris. We will start the next question with you as well. A proposed constitutional amendment has been introduced in both chambers of the New York State Legislature to divide the state into 3 separate regions. The New Amsterdam region, that's where we would be, the New York region, and the Montauk region. Briefly, each region would have all the structure of a state, and the state government will still exist with its own governor and a legislature consisting of the combined regional legislatures. Most, but not all, state departments will be abolished. The state's only income will be a sales tax. 2-part question here. If this bill is introduced in the next session, will you support it? And 2, what do you think the financial impact of the plan would be, even if you would support it or wouldn't support it? Chris, it's on you.
Okay, great. So I actually think this is a great follow-up to our previous question, because if we're talking about the voice of people feeling like they matter, I'll tell you, there's a lot of people in Western New York and in the northern area of this state that feel like their voice doesn't matter. The best way for democracy to be fulfilled may be for a proposal along these lines to come to fruition. I think one of the problems, and this happens every year with this state, is we lump too many things together in at one time. I think that should be a separate proposal, and it should allow us to move forward in empowering the voice of more members of more communities in this state. On the issue of sales tax being the only tax generator for the state government, I would have a really hard time with that provision. There are a lot of things that need to be funded in this state. In a way, though, it makes portions of this state more reliant upon what it is they can provide. So I'd have to say I'd have to back off that portion of this proposal. But I am 100% for making sure that every voice feels and is something that matters in state government here.
Chris, I want to be very specific. So will you
Yep.
support the proposal into separating New York State into 3 states, or would you look at it and really have to examine it, but would consider it? I just want to make sure we're clear with the voters.
If I was on the floor of the Senate right now, I'd probably have to vote no, only because I don't know every aspect of it. But what I can tell you is my philosophy is empower people, promote liberty. And if that means we can divide the state so that there is a greater sense that their voice matters and more representation, in Albany, I would definitely consider proposals like that.
Thank you very much, Chris. Samra, same question to you.
I would not support legislation like this. And in fact, I have to be honest, I don't think that it's a serious piece of legislation. I think it's something that pops up once every few years, who knows why. But the real truth is, in all of my work, whether it's advocacy, nonprofits, working with seniors, whatever the work is, you have to really dig into why someone is bringing this up, right? And why people might feel in any way like this is a solution. And I think it does go to having representation that's willing to listen to you. I think it does go towards someone having a leader who's willing to create bridges and to work with the other leaders in our state to make things work for every New Yorker. And that's what I've been doing all along this campaign. It's important to me that people all over New York State understand what it's like to live here in Western New York. This is a beautiful place. We have some of the best parks. We have some of the best higher ed institutions, the best hospitals, the medical. We have Wegmans. We have so much here in Western New York. And often what's missing is people having that understanding. So part of leadership's role is to bridge that gap and create that understanding so that the laws are working for us here in Western New York.
Thank you very much to both candidates. Again, I wanted to clarify, not 3 states. I mentioned 3 regions being 1 state. I want to make sure that I clarified that. Samra, we'll start with you with this next question. New York passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which set ambitious goals to reduce carbon emissions. 2-part question here as well. 1, do you support this act? If not, explain your stance. And part 2 to that question is, if you support it, is enough being done to implement the act? Do you think New York is on track to meet the goals?
First of all, in terms of climate change, we can't make incremental change anymore, right? I think most people in my generation understand the time is past for incremental small measures. The only choice we have is to be ambitious. If I'm thinking about my future kids and I'm thinking about my kids' kids, I want to make sure that there is a planet and a community that isn't vastly different than what we have today. And because of that, I absolutely support the CLCPA. And I think that there is a lot that we need to do to make sure that we're actually able to meet some of these very ambitious goals. Here's the truth. With COVID-19, we are all hurting, right? Revenues are down. We've had to delay certain release of funds for different parts of our climate goals and our climate agenda. But the truth is, what I think we really need to do is find out where, when we're rebuilding our economy, when we're looking at economic recovery, make it a green economic recovery. When we're looking at investing in infrastructure and making sure that we're rebuilding our roads and our bridges. I'm biased because my father's a civil engineer and will tell you where a bridge needs to be fixed or a road needs to be fixed, but we can make it green infrastructure. We can make sure that we are training people to get them back to work, but that they're doing it in green jobs so that nobody's left behind, so that they're working living wage jobs, and so that we are setting up our communities sustainably, and that we're setting up our communities so that we are better in a better position for climate change.
Thank you. Chris, same question to you.
Great. So I grow grapes and I'm a winemaker. I work intimately with the soil, and I have seen firsthand the struggles that we have with climate change. We absolutely do need to address these issues. And I support all measures to have cleaner water, no lead in water, cleaner air. I make it a priority. I do come at this a little different, which is this. we can have an impact in this state, and our infrastructure certainly needs to be addressed. But the core of my infrastructure bank proposal is about reestablishing American manufacturing and reshoring our manufacturing. And why? Because so much of the manufacturing that is done in places like China has no care for the environment. And what they do in polluting our environment impacts us. You know, people forget that for something like the last decade, China has built a new coal plant every day. We don't have a single operating coal plant in New York because we're moving in the right direction. So I don't think the way things are shaping up, we are going to be able to meet many of the goals that we have in this state. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try, but we need to keep in mind that this is a whole world problem. And the only way that we're going to solve it is with novel new ideas and reducing global pollution.
Thanks very much. Shifting gears here, Chris, I'll start with you for the next question. Do you support single-payer healthcare? And explain your answer, please.
Yeah. So I've examined this, and I know we have different positions on this. When I look at the New York Health Act, which has received a lot of support in this state from candidates, I see that it's going to cost $139 billion. That's $50 billion more than our state budget. What I say is, let's embrace the 3% of our population that doesn't have health care. Let's get them covered. And I have a plan to do that. By doubling the earned income tax credit and opening up a special feature of the marketplace, we can ensure that the people in this state who don't have the resources to have health care right now can get it. What I worry about is single-payer healthcare eliminating the thousands upon thousands of health insurance-related jobs in Rochester, of our union members. And I've got a number of union endorsements who say, if this passes, I'm going to lose some really great coverage that I sacrificed my salary for. I took lower pay so I could have good health coverage for life, and what's being proposed isn't quite as good. So I think we need to keep all of these things in mind. Again, I support healthcare. I am an advocate for it. But it's about embracing that 3% that doesn't have it right now, not relying on a scheme that will raise taxes. I always like to say, you know, there are complex solutions to simple problems, but simple solutions to complex problems are usually a lie.
Thanks very much. Samra, same question to you.
Yeah, I think that, you know, as I've talked to voters throughout this district, to be honest, the number one thing I hear about is healthcare. And I've talked to a much larger portion than 3%. And what that tells me is that even people who have some coverage still don't feel secure and safe knowing that they have what they need to feel supported, to have the preventative medicine they need, to feel like they have someone to go to if they did have COVID-19 symptoms. And that tells me there's a problem. All the way from down in Richmond talking to a farmer where I said, what's the number one thing you need me to know? He said, fix healthcare. I lost my entire family farm because my father got sick and it was exorbitantly expensive to take care of him. And I talked to people up here or our suburban communities who are dealing with the same thing. So the truth is, this is an issue that we have talked about for decades now. It's not a new issue. It's not a radical issue. This is a common sense issue to say, especially right now. New York is in the middle, the world is in the middle of a global health crisis. We have to choose our people. We have to say, you are worth making bold change to make sure that no one is left behind and that everyone is taken care of. So yes, I do support changing our system.
Thank you very much. Samra, we'll start with you with this next question. You will represent a combination of urban and suburban areas in Monroe County and rural and small towns in Ontario County. Two-part question here. Can you give some specific examples of what specific legislation you will support to benefit Monroe County, and give a couple of examples of specific legislation that would benefit Ontario County?
I have to start with the fact that I know this question was intended to say these are two very different places and there's nothing that they could ever agree on or no piece of legislation that would help both of them, right? But I don't accept that premise, and here's why. First of all, if there were anyone, anywhere, someone who really understood our urban, suburban, and rural communities, it is me. I've lived in our cities, I attended our city schools. I lived in our suburbs, I attended our public schools, our suburb schools. I've been in the rural areas with my own extended family who's been there for the past 100+ years, going to church, teaching Sunday school, going to my cousin's basketball games. All of that to say, I spent the better part of my life in these communities, learning the values and the needs of these communities. The story I just told about healthcare doesn't care what county you're in. The same issues that my grandparents are dealing with, having to drive 45 minutes to get to a rural hospital when they need healthcare, or the fact that during COVID, they had to do telehealth and we didn't want them going into the office. And so we had to make sure they had high enough speed internet, or even just to be connected to their grandkids to fight senior isolation. Guess what? Both of those issues are also an issue in so many of our places in Monroe County. We have kids who were sitting in a parking lot of a Starbucks because they didn't have high-speed internet at home when they were remote learning. We have parents who don't know what to do about getting healthcare for themselves and for their kids. And the truth is, I've talked to folks on all sides of this. I have almost near unanimous endorsement from most of the unions here in Monroe and Ontario County. The Chamber of Commerce supports me and this race and our ideas around the things that we need to fight for. And I say all of that because we always see these as people on the opposite sides of the table. The truth is we're on the same side of the table because we all know it's our job to go to Albany and make sure that we can fight for what we need.
Thank you very much. Chris, same question.
Well, thanks. And, I got to say, I have a business in a rural area. I do a lot of business in the suburban and the urban areas as well. Being a winemaker, I make a product and it goes lots of places, and I rely on people working in those places. And I've been doing that for the last near decade. I haven't been in New York City. I've been right here attached to these issues. And that's why I have proposed something that I think will impact everybody. That's why I've proposed the infrastructure bank and plenty of mechanisms to get it funded. And within that concept, creating empowerment zones in our most distressed urban and rural communities. Infrastructure isn't just roads and bridges, and it isn't even just wastewater. I look at infrastructure as being those things which increase the dignity of our community members. That means a good place to sleep at night. That includes affordable housing. It includes broadband. By creating these empowerment zones and funding mechanisms to attract business and to spark new startups, that's how we improve the lives of people. When people have jobs, they can get good health care. So that's why I'm standing in this way, and that's why I've got NFIB and lots of unions supporting me in this.
Thank you very much. Chris, I don't know if you're seeing the next questions in my thick glasses here, but we'll stay with the infrastructure here. So what action would you take to ensure that every household in New York State has reliable broadband access at an affordable price, whether for school, work, or personal use?
Yeah, it is clearly one of the most important issues. And so often it gets relegated as being something that isn't an issue a lot of people have to deal with if you're living in a suburban or urban community, but it is a reality. And that's why it's one of the hallmark issues within the infrastructure program. We've got a situation in this state where the Democrats decided to tax laying new fiber optic lines, except that tax is so high that it is actually more than the cost of getting the lines and running the service. We need to look at how the taxation is done in this state and then the funding as well to make sure these programs can be put in place. And I go further because it isn't just broadband. I've been an advocate for hardening our electrical transmission lines. Too many communities are experiencing too frequent power outages. And that says nothing of the potential for whether man-made or natural electromagnetic pulses that could bring our entire grid down. I put all of the electrical transmission in line with broadband. It is an essential service for our people. And we need to make sure that whether you are a child who is now stuck at home and trying to log on to Zoom so you can get your education, whether you're in a far-flung part of this state and you don't even get cell service, in order to have commerce, in order to have education, and in order to have health, we need to make sure everybody has broadband access. So infrastructure bank, and let's get this tax down.
Thank you very much, Chris. Samra, same question.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I talked about, high-speed internet and needing broadband for everyone when we're talking about virtual health visits, right? And telemedicine. It's not an issue in and of itself. It's not a siloed issue. It affects your ability to get healthcare. It affects your ability to be educated right now successfully and to be able to take part in your activities at school. And the truth is, right now, we've got to move into the 21st century finally and realize that along with heat, along with water, internet should be a public utility. It is something that really, truly, no one can survive, thrive, be prepared to enter the workforce, finish their schoolwork, get in touch with their therapist or their doctor. No one can do those things without having high-speed internet. And so the minute we stop thinking of this as this private thing that only some people get and realize that it's actually going to improve all of our lives, it means we have a more prepared workforce. It means we're able to connect and communicate better. It means our businesses can grow in places where they can't grow right now. That is what having this as a public utility will do. And that's why I support that.
Thank you so much. So we'll stay in this infrastructure lane. Samra, I'll start with you. And I just want you to generally, with the time provided, talk about the lack of affordable housing, and more specifically, talk about affordable housing and its access in other areas of your district, not only the city, but the option to have affordable housing in other areas of your district as well.
And I like that you said use the time allotted, because this could be a 20-minute conversation. And I think that it's come up a lot recently, right? We're talking about housing. We're looking at our communities, who's allowed in certain communities, who can afford to live in certain communities. I feel I need to just start this with what my experience is. I'm a renter. I'm a tenant. My husband and I aspire as millennials to buy a home here in Rochester. I actually looked very much in the North Whitten Village because it's beautiful. But the truth is, we've lived what it's like to try to find affordable housing. We work in the nonprofit sector and we're proud of the work we do. That also means that you may have limitations on what you can get. And we hear that story. So I think we really need to kind of step back when we're thinking about affordable housing. Again, how do we think about these things as rights and not privileges? Certainly, we can all agree that it's a right that people should be able to afford and be comfortable in their homes. Certainly right now, especially, we agree that having people housed and living, whether it's apartments or their own homes, especially during a public health crisis, that it is something that is going to benefit all of us as a community and a society. And so when we think about what the state legislator can do, right, what our leadership can do in terms of where developments are being made and how they're being made and who has access, we have a tremendous opportunity to make sure that no matter where you are, there are options. And I'm glad that you brought it up in places outside of urban areas. We see this in rural areas as well. We have a number of areas that are building up more affordable units for people to be able to enjoy living in those rural areas. And I think that our state legislators can do a lot more to help promote that.
Thank you so much. Chris, same question.
Thank you. So I look at this two ways. We have a situation with regards to affordable housing, both for those who rent and then those who are looking to buy a house. When it comes to affordable housing, it's why the infrastructure bank encompasses affordable housing so that we can fund these projects. In talking with affordable housing developers, particularly in the city, you know, one of the things they tell me is, Chris, it takes at least 5-6 years for the funding to get in line before I start my project. So that tells me two things. That's 5 or 6 years without a good place for folks to rest their head that gives them dignity. That's 5 or 6 years where jobs aren't getting created. That's 5 or 6 years we're pushing economic development down the line. We need to stop that. We need to get these projects funded. Secondly, it's about availability of housing. You don't increase the size of the housing market with programs like rent control the way New York City does it. And third, it's about property taxes. Because if someone aspires to own a home and they buy a home and they are saddled with some of the largest property taxes in the state, their one asset for retirement and college funding and their life isn't going to accrue in the value that it should.
Thanks very much to both of you on your responses. We'll stay on this line. Chris, we'll start with you in regards to housing and tenant protection. So I want to get your thoughts, both of your thoughts, on the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. So these are three-part questions in regards to this act in 2019. So do you agree with the time frame it now takes, it's months, for property managers to remove a non-paying tenant from an apartment? I want to get your perspective pre and post, well, pre-COVID and current COVID. And also part two, do you agree with the part of the law that prohibits property managers from using prior eviction records to decide whether to rent to a tenant or not? And then the final part of that question, are you in favor of the good faith eviction legislation? Chris, the question is yours. Go right ahead.
Great. You might have to just guide me a little bit.
I will, no problem, I will.
You know, first and foremost, I do want to say that when we started our lockdown, I looked at my business. I was closed for 3 months, no cash flow. I was thankful that our unemployment for some of my employees was able to kick in fairly quickly. For others, it was an utter disaster to cover any rent costs they had. And I understood that there would need to be some protections for renters, because the last thing we want is people thrown out on the street when they can't even have a job. You know, but we are facing a difficult situation because the governor says we are doing this because we are a compassionate state. And yet for a lot of folks, you know, people of not great means, their whole business or their whole dream, their extra business that they slave on the weekends for is that rental property. They can't afford to pay the property taxes without it. They can't afford to continue to maintain it, to pay for heating. So I would say if we were a compassionate state, this would be something that, especially at certain thresholds, the state would need to make sure that it is taking care of those small landlords so that they aren't left high and dry and losing their whole life savings. On the issue of prior evictions, so when I was 10 years old, our family went bankrupt and we lost everything. And I mean, that was a really hard time. And we had to rely on renting. And there were times where we didn't know if the rent could get paid. I am extremely compassionate for people in that situation. And I just don't think that if someone loses the ability to make their rent payment in a place they were living, that they should be kept out on the street. So protections do need to exist in some ways for our tenants. But we have to be cognizant that if we strangle supply and if we strangle the small business owners, the entire supply is going to disappear.
And are you in favor of the good faith eviction legislation?
I hate to say it, Tyrese, but I don't know exactly what you're referring to.
And I wasn't providing much details on it either. So Chris, we'll move along. Samra, question is yours.
Sure. So first of all, I think it's really important to go back to the fact of what do we believe are rights in our country? I think we all agree that voting is a right. Some of us agree that healthcare is a right. And some of us agree that housing is a right and that it's something that everyone should have access to. And it's something that it should be stable. People shouldn't have to worry if they're going to be kicked out of their homes, especially as we think about what's happening right now. Because the truth is, all that will do is make our crisis, our public health crisis, worse. Now, having said that, you know, I've talked to folks on all sides of this issue. I've talked to big landlords, large landlords with lots of buildings. I've talked to small landlords. I've talked to tenants. I've talked to people who are doing fine, and I've talked to people who are concerned about whether or not they can pay rent. And what I've come down to is we have to be able to support people on both sides of this. We have to be able to support tenants to not fear that they might be getting kicked out. We have to make it easier for tenants to find a place to live. And of course, we have to make sure that, of course, the people who own these buildings are not being put out to dry. And so when we think about the good cause, the good faith eviction, what we're talking about is allowing people to have that support and be able to renew their lease, be able to not have enormous rent hikes and get kicked out of their home for those reasons, and make them more in line with perhaps inflation or what a normal hike would be. And that's the kind of protections that we do need to make sure that we're keeping people housed.
Thank you very much. Samra, we'll start with you for the next question, and we'll be shifting gears here. Do you support retaining the New York SAFE Act as it is? Explain your response, if so. And if you don't support the act in its entirety, what are some of the components of the act that you support or you don't support?
Yes, I support the New York SAFE Act, and I'm honored and privileged to also be a gun sense candidate from the Moms Demand Action. And I'll tell you why. I think there was a lot of fear around what the New York SAFE Act would bring. But as we've seen, it has not detrimentally changed anyone's life. And I will say this as someone who has a family full of hunters. I've talked to gun owners. A lot of my family members are gun owners, and they still enjoy hunting just as they ever did. And I also think that we need to give a kudos. New York State has done a tremendous job with a lot of the laws that we've passed and the protections that we've passed. And now when we look at what's happening on our federal level, when we look at what's happening in our national leaders, we know that at least New York State can make sure that we stay strong on these laws, that we make sure that we're keeping our children of all people safe, and that we don't roll back these very important pieces of legislation, but rather move forward by continuing to keep us safe, continuing to make sure that guns from other states don't end up here. And that's why I'm a proponent of the law.
Thank you very much. Chris?
You know, I'm a military veteran. I've got plenty of experience with firearms. And when I look at a 55% increase in violent crime in Rochester, the governor just said 100% increase in crime across the state. I hate to say it, but I come back to this one thing. The thing that is making us unsafe is bail reform. Because these gun crimes that people are committing, felons who have guns, handguns that are obtained illegally, I don't see a lot of black rifles or assault rifles involved in that. Those folks are right back out on the street, obtaining additional illegal guns and committing more crimes. So, you know, on the issue of the SAFE Act, yeah, I'll admit, I think it went too far in some ways, and I don't necessarily like it. It's not going to get overturned. It's not even an issue in this state. What is an issue is the fact that bail reform deliberately doesn't deal with the specific issue that the SAFE Act was trying to do, which is keep communities safe, which is prevent more gun violence, because that's not working.
Thanks. Chris, we'll stay right there with you because you brought up bail reform and the components of bail reform. And I think you hear a lot of people talk about you hear it in the media, you hear from different people that because of bail reform, so many people have been put back on the streets. And I think some of the pushback some people may have to that argument is that putting more people in jail is not going to stop gun violence because it's always existed with us. So talk a bit more about that specifically, and how can we bring down gun violence specifically, and then talk a bit about bail reform. And you mentioned in your answer a bit, I know that you probably don't support some components of it. Tell us any of the components of bail reform, any of the criminal justice reforms that were enacted by New York State that you support, that you don't support, you like, you don't like.
Yeah.
Go right ahead.
So, you know, first and foremost, on the issue of bail reform, like I alluded to earlier, I always understand there are areas we need to be
8:30.
so
Okay.
What was that, Judy?
In any event,
Okay.
there are areas that
I'm sorry, go right ahead. Can we start, Chris, go ahead. Can we start Chris's time over? I'm sorry about that.
Thank you. So I always support a wholesale review of every law. You know, we need to always make sure that if there are things we need to reform, we can. I believe that if we had gone down the no cash bail direction, at the very least, give judges carte blanche discretion. They're the ones that are closest to seeing whether someone is going to be a risk to a community, going to victimize members of communities, and shouldn't be back out on the streets. That's not what happened. And the fix that Albany supposedly made didn't really fix it because people are still suffering from it. I also start from this angle, that the most important thing in our community is our families. And there are too many times where an individual may have been arrested for a crime that they did not do. And that process of being separated from their family until they're acquitted of that crime may lead to that family crumbling. So if that's the goal, what we need to do is make sure that judges have discretion, that they can carve out those instances where someone more than likely is not going to victimize our communities, that isn't going to jeopardize public safety, and can go ahead and say, on your own recognizance, you need to come back. But that's not happening in a lot of instances now. They're not showing back up for court, and a lot of people are continuing to commit crimes. So on bail reform, on other criminal justice reforms, I go back and say, the independent grand jury isn't a political opportunity. It isn't just a proposal, a magic wand, but it is an important part, because if we're talking about communities being involved in decisions, I can't think of a better way.
Thanks so much, Chris. Appreciate that. And thank you for starting over again with your answer. Samra, talk a bit about solutions for gun violence. What do you support in regards to the criminal justice reforms passed by the state? What do you like? What don't you like?
Well, I'll tell you what I like. What I like is a justice system that is just for all. I like a justice system that treats you the same, whether you have millions of dollars in good credit to post bail or whether you don't. I like a justice system that protects and serves all of us equally, regardless of where we live, our income, our race, our immigrant status. Those are the things that I like. And those are the things that I think a lot of people in New York support and believe in, because we all want to feel safe in our communities. And I think that if we want to continue moving in that direction, we really need to take a hard look at how we got here. Let's look at root causes. You will hear me say this a lot. Go to why things are happening. Gun violence doesn't happen because of guns. Violence is happening because we have concentrated poverty. We have people who do not have opportunities. We have a region here in the Rochester area who has not had a voice at the table in Albany to say, we need more resources. We need our fair share. We need people with living wage jobs who feel secure, who can go home, know that they have internet and food on the table and are comfortable in their homes. Those are the things that we need to deliver for our communities. And so that's what I think we need to be talking about when we talk about bringing down violence. I know my time is out and I didn't get a chance to talk about the second piece.
Go right ahead. Talk about it really quickly.
Very, very quickly. The second piece is I really want us to focus on what bail reform is actually about. What it's actually about is simply equalizing our justice system, because right now we live in a country in our justice system where you are better off being guilty and rich than being innocent and poor. And I know that the people in the 55th district understand that that is not what they stand for, and they know that we can do better. Thanks for giving me that.
Thank you. We'll go. This is going to be our second to last question. And we'll start with you, Chris, for this question. What are some of the ideas of making New York a more small business friendly state and encouraging more living wages for people without a college education? You've talked a bit about your small business and small business in general. So let's be really specific about some of the specific initiatives that if you're elected, you would push for to make sure that folks can have good jobs and small businesses can be supported and people without a college education can earn a living wage.
Yep. So I grew up with a dad who a couple years before I was born was working in a plumbing supply warehouse, eventually learned the trade, got a plumbing truck, started a business. I grew up soldering copper pipe and digging ditches. And I helped him in his transition of that plumbing business into becoming a union plumbing business. So I believe that we spent the last 30 plus years telling every single kid that they needed to go to college. And there's a lot of people whose skill sets are better attuned in other areas. I would put an enormous effort on increasing trade education, on increasing the number of manufacturing opportunities available here for people who want to work with their hands. And I will not be someone who says you work with your hands or you work with your head. That simply isn't the case. You need both. And I tell you what, I know my dad's worked a lot with his head, and almost everybody I know who's in a trade does the same thing. A couple ways I'll do that. One is increasing the availability of these jobs. The infrastructure bank is a key step to providing funding for the projects that lay the foundation to attract more businesses. That's number one. Number two, I believe that the New York Guard, which isn't the New York National Guard, this is a separate state group that is really quite small right now. And when COVID came around, I thought, oh my gosh, this would have been perfect for it, because what they do is fill sandbags along Irondequoit Bay. They have health training. They have all sorts of community support. I'd encourage people to get involved in the New York Guard and guarantee 2 years of community college. I got a lot of other ideas, but I'm not going to.
We'll send them to your website, Chris. We'll send them
Yep.
to your website. Samra, same question to you.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to start with training because it's a very relevant example right now. Just last week, we spent time at the multi-craft pre-apprenticeship program, MAP. It's called MAP. And what it is a pre-apprenticeship program that helps folks get trained to actually go into the trades. And I was able to spend time with MAP and learn about the programs that they have. I'm honored to be endorsed by the Building Trades and Construction Council for exactly these types of things. And what I learned was that they haven't gotten the $200,000 that they need to continue their program this year. This is a proven program. These are the kinds of training programs we need, because here's what they do. They are able to gather students, recent high school graduates, people working in perhaps other hourly jobs. And I heard this amazing story from one of the gentlemen who spoke, who's now an alum of this program and is now an actual apprentice, an electrician, and in a union, and will have a career for the rest of his life if he makes it through that apprenticeship. He was working at a hardware store, and one of the MAP executive directors said, "Hey, you're a hustler. Why don't you try coming into this apprenticeship program?" Those are the kinds of things we need. Someone who's willing to make those connections and then support those kinds of programs, because we have so much potential here. And I know we have so much potential here. Our graduates, we have hardworking people here who are committed to helping their communities, and they want good jobs, and they want to be able to support their families. And we have to do better. We have to be able to fund these types of programs.
Thank you both very much for your responses. So, Samra, I'll start with you with this question. This question is for both of you. This will be the last question before your closing statements. So we've talked a lot about issues across the state, and we've talked about issues specifically to your district. We've talked about the different urban, suburban, rural aspects of your Senate district. So I want you to think about, if you're elected and you go to the Capitol in January, what is the number one issue that the voters, the people you represent in your district, are going to want you to hit on day one? What would be that number one issue that's facing the folks of your district in the Senate District 55? Samra, go right ahead.
It's a tie for two because I'm not listening to the rules. But it's education and healthcare. It's the same two things that come up. These are the things that you're talking about around your kitchen table. These are the things that parents are thinking about before they go to bed every night. They're the things that wake them up every morning. They want to know, will my young people, do my students, do my children have what they need? Are they safe? Will they be able to succeed the way we were able to succeed? Healthcare, we are still in the middle of a public health crisis, and we still have people who aren't getting the healthcare that they need, and we have to be able to do better. The top two things that we look at cutting in this state right now are education and healthcare. And when I talk to our county executive, Adam Bello, and he tells me we cannot take any more cuts from the state right now to be able to provide the healthcare that we need for people, that is not a conversation I want to have with our county executive, to say, I can't deliver you the funds you need so that you can keep people healthy and continue doing a good job as we may contain the COVID-19 crisis. And I think the third thing that people are very concerned about right now is making sure that New York State can stay protected for so many of the protections we've had around women's rights, which are human rights, and reproductive rights that we know could be stripped away at any moment via our Supreme Court and our federal government. And so that is what I think folks across New York State in the 55th district are very concerned about. They want to make sure that they send someone that shares those values with them, that's willing to advocate and speak up for them, but most importantly, is able to actually get it done.
Thank you very much. Chris, same question.
You know, I think the one thing that actually touches on all the points my opponent talked about, education, health, the cuts that are coming, is the fact that the voice of the people has been silenced from the executive orders. You know, our legislators can't do anything with these across the board 20% cuts. They're just coming down. The first thing I would do, and the first thing I hear from a lot of people on the street and in emails and on Facebook, is end the executive order. Give us back our voice. Then we can actually start to talk about the itemized pieces of legislation and how we're going to fix it. We can talk about how we're going to fix healthcare. We can talk about how we will actually adequately fund education. But you know, the whole list of issues I want to bring are things I'm going to talk about from the first day. And it's going to be realistic visions like an infrastructure bank to rebuild this state. It's going to be things like term limits. It's going to be things like allowing people to recall politicians, something that I know a lot of people in Rochester want to do right now. So I see my time, but
You can finish your sentence, Chris. Go ahead.
so, you know, again, it is ending the executive authority, allow people in the legislature to actually have their job. Let them be the voice of the people. Let them make the laws. And let's stop the corruption. Let's stop the blackmailing. Let's stop all of the things that are polluting our state from an ethical level.
We got through all the questions, everybody. Thank you both. So we're going to give 3 minutes to each candidate for closing statements. This is your time to talk to the voters in your district. So 3 minutes. We'll start with Samra, then we'll go right into Chris. So Samra, go right ahead.
Well, thank you again, Therese. You did a wonderful job. And this was, I would say, much smoother debate than many of us witnessed earlier this week. So I think that says everything about this district and the people of the Rochester region. But you know what I have to say to folks at home? My entire life, I have been preparing to serve you. Professionally, that has meant working with city governments to help combat climate change. It's meant serving seniors to make sure that they get what they need at their homes to age in place comfortably and safely. It's meant raising millions of dollars for nonprofits that are helping to get young people civically engaged, and also shining a light on the inequalities in our education system that so many of us witness here within the 55th district. And my story is the story of the 55th district. I was born and raised right here in the city of Rochester. I've attended our city schools. I graduated from Pittsburgh Menon High School, and I'm a proud Viking. And my grandparents have lived down in Bloomfield for the past 85 years. And I share that story because throughout this forum, not debate, throughout this forum, you have heard how important it is that we have someone who can speak to the city and urban communities, who can speak with the suburban communities, who can speak with the rural communities. But more than speak with them, will listen. I have gone up and down this district several times, and I've got the miles on my little car to prove it. And I did that because it was important that in addition to the deep roots that I have in this community, there's no way I can know everything. And so we have been visiting every town, every village. Doesn't matter your party, doesn't matter your income, doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter your geography, because I want to serve every single person in the 55th district. We are all about to vote in one of the most consequential elections in our lifetimes for many of us. You've heard that this is a vote for the soul of our nation, and our community has an opportunity to send a resounding message. Not only do we believe in one of our own, a born and bred Rochesterian, someone whose parents, grandparents, brothers, cousins are here in the community, and I know what's at stake in this community. But we also have a chance to send a resounding message that our young people are worth the investment, and that we send someone who's going to fight to make sure that we get the education funding that we need. We can send a message that in the midst of a public health crisis, we believe that all New Yorkers should feel safe and healthy at home and have the health care that they need right now. We can send a message that regardless of what happens in the federal government, regardless of what happens in the Supreme Court, here in New York, we believe that women's rights are human rights, and that we believe that we deserve those protections as New Yorkers. That's what I'm asking you all to believe in. And here's why I'm so excited about it. It's not my vision. It's all of our vision. This is why I have spent time talking to thousands of voters throughout the district. And this is why I am so ready to serve you. And it will be the greatest pleasure of my lifetime. And that's why I'm asking whether you vote by mail, whether you do early voting, or whether you vote November 3rd, to vote for Democrat Samra Brouk. Thank you.
Thank you, Samra. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I've lived a pretty interesting life. And when I moved back to the Finger Lakes nearly a decade ago to open up our business, to employ folks with a dream of planting vines and making small lots of wine that people could appreciate, I was coming back to the place where my great-grandfather farmed. I was coming back to the place where my grandfather raised 7 kids in the 10th Ward, when Bob Duffy would run over and drink out of the water fountain on the side of his house that he'd put in for all those kids. I came back to the place where I had a paper route when I was in Churchville Chili Middle School, delivering the Times-Union, the thing that sparked my interest in politics, reading the news every day. I came back with a dream. And I came back after having experienced a lot of things in life, having served in the military, deployed to Operation Iraqi Freedom, having been a sergeant and having led a squad, having endured hardship, having gone through the process of learning the law and then practicing the law and being licensed to practice from California to New York and to the Supreme Court of the United States. I decided to leave that, to pursue something that I thought was a bit more natural, a bit more in tune with what I wanted out of my life. I was happy to leave high billable hours in corporate law to experience something real, to plant those vines. And in all of that, in raising a family here, I just had a daughter 6 weeks ago. I have a son who's 3.5. I realized that although I came back, I do not want to be in the position that so many of my friends and family are, that their children are going to North Carolina, to Texas, to Idaho, all over the place. They're not together. And I realized that that combination of high taxes, job opportunities, and crime are driving down the quality of life in this state. I have said over and over, it is not the cold climate. It's the business climate. It's the opportunities. How do we solve crime? By fixing poverty. How do we have better jobs and have people in less poverty? With innovative ideas like the infrastructure bank and proposals to get things built. You know, this is an election of consequence, and we aren't just sending a delegate. We're sending someone who is going to Albany to be a leader. I am a leader, and I have been tested, and I'm happy to present innovative solutions based in large part on conversations with folks and running a business and seeing what we need. You know, I talk about water because water is an issue. At my winery, we are on a well. You know, that's not always reliable water. Building those sorts of programs and projects to build more businesses in this state, to employ people and make a better life. We can do this. I'm thrilled to be a part of this, and I'm asking for your vote, because I want to make sure that the lives of everyone in the 55th district get better.
Thank you to both candidates. Thank you for all of our participants. It's been my absolute pleasure to be with both of you tonight. Folks in the 55th have a very tough decision, so I wish you both the best of luck. Thank you to the best timekeeper, Linda. She is the absolute best. And I will turn it back over to Judy from the Women League of Voters.
Thank you, Tyrese. And thank you to our candidates, Samra, Brouk, and Chris Missick. And thank you to Tyrese for the wonderful question. I am also want to thank Judy Weinstein. Judy Weinstein has been our Zoom manager. And Linda Solomon has been the timekeeper you've seen. Now, let's see here. I am trying to put, not sure if, are people seeing the voting options?
Yes, you just have to make it full screen, the PowerPoint.
Let me see, okay.
You lost
Not
it.
seeing the, is
Yes.
it full screen
Yes.
there now?
Yes,
Oh,
it-
very good. All right, so in closing here, just want to urge everyone to review their voting options. Is it going to be absentee or in person? Absentee voters need to get, complete, and return their ballots and are urged to do that well before Election Day. In-person voters need to decide whether early or on Election Day. Check out early voting days, times, and locations on the League or on the Board of Elections website. Election Day voters can double check their polling place on the on the Board of Elections website. And that brings us to our last slide here. Everyone can go to Vote 411 to take a look at all the candidates who will be on their ballots and find out more information about those candidates. All candidates on the ballots have been sent questionnaires, and most of them have responded. So you can see a little bit about them and how they stand on some of the issues. Down below, we have information about our own website and about North Winton Village Association, their websites, how to email and contact them. So again, thank you all for joining us tonight. And please, I hope all of you will get out there and vote. If you have any questions, you can either contact the League through our email. You can just send us any question you have about anything that you don't understand about voting. And you can also check the Board of Elections for that. So on this, we are going to close out the evening. Thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.